Hello and welcome. What can stop Somalia's downhill spiral as a resurgence of fighting continues to take civilian lives and displaces over 1 million? Well, the country, listed among the world's most corrupt, is unable to rebuild infrastructure and rule of law while the government remains fractured, facing the onslaught of rebel forces. Somalia's transitional government, under the leadership of President Sharif Ahmed, is barely hanging on to control of the capital, Mogadishu. A recent push by the Al-Shabaab rebels to take over the city reportedly failed because of a split among the rebels themselves. The Somali government forces, backed by African Union troops, have had little impact on Al-Shabaab's control of much of the country's southern region or the central areas where other militant groups such as Hizbul Islam and Ahlus Sunnah wa Al-Jama are active in challenging Al-Shabaab's insurgency. The appointment of a new prime minister has created battles within the government, pitting the president against parliament. After last month's resignation of Omar Abdurrashid Ali Sharmake, President Sharif nominated Somali-American Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed as his replacement. Well, Parliament has failed to confirm the nomination in a dispute over how to vote on it. So today we ask, how can Somalia take steps to resolve its conflicts, both political and military? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me to discuss the issues are Professor Syed Samatar, who teaches history at Rutgers University. He's expressed his continued criticism of foreign intervention in Somalia in his editorial, America, Pray Leave Somalia to Its Own Devices. He's joining us from New York. And joining me here in the studio is Abdul Qadir Abdurrahman, Communications Director of Somali Cause, an organization that promotes education in the region. Mr. Abdurrahman says Somalia needs support from the West. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Professor, if I could start with you,
pleasure.
sir. Yeah, it's great to have you with us, sir. And Professor, why is it that the conflict just continues at such a pace? Why is it the transitional federal government's had such a hard time controlling more than just a small patch of Mogadishu and almost sort of barricaded up in the capital there?
Well, because they are weak. And even with the 4,000 man army from Uganda and Burundi, even with the help of those African Union troops, they can't roll back Al-Shabaab because they are simply weak and corrupt. And from what I understand, the Sheikh Sharif can't even trust the troops that has been trained for his own security because they desert.
But then, Professor, when you advocate leaving Somalia to its own devices, considering what you've just described, surely that's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely not, if I may respectfully disagree. First of all, there are several Somalias now. We tend to focus our attention on the capital city and the south. Sure, that's an important part of the country. But there is Puntland and Somaliland, both of whom are doing quite well. So we should let our viewers know that we're talking about Mogadishu and surrounding regions. Now, Al-Shabaab, here's the scenario I propose. Take the international forces out. That will ensure Al-Shabaab's victory. But I predict that Al-Shabaab will not be able to rule Somalia for a long time because they have a barbaric 7th century view of Islam, which they are imposing on the Somalis, where they ban music, amputate legs for petty theft, stone people to death, barbaric ban on music. And Somali Islam is not like that.
Okay.
It's not fanatical. Somali Islam is a Sufi Islam. It's a mystical Islam.
All right, well, Professor, I'm going to get back to some of the points you've raised there. Thank you for that. I'm going to bring in Abdul Qadir Abdurrahman here. And thank you for being with us. Good to have you with us as well, sir.
Thank you.
You feel there is a role, of course, for outside forces, and that you know what the professor's saying about leaving Somalia to its own devices is potentially disastrous. But the support that has come from the outside so far hasn't helped in all these years to stabilize the government. What's gone wrong?
That's true, but let me just clarify what the professor said and explain exactly is why the Somali need international assistance. There was numerous times when the international community tried to assist Somalia, and each time it failed. And some of the failure is also the responsibility of the international community, the way they conducted themselves, the way they sided with groups against different groups of Somalia. But the focus of Somalia is that we need the main good governance, humanitarian assistance, and also the Somali people need a government, system of government that works. And that system of government should come within Somali people. It should not be imposed from outside. But the current Djibouti process produced a Somali process where the TFG at the time and the Sheikh Sharif, who was leading the Union of Islamic Courts, came together, and Sheikh Sharif became the president of Somalia.
Right.
So in such, if he is given a chance, he has been there for 2 years now, faced a lot of problems, and also has not conducted himself as a president. There were some mistakes, of course, that I admit the TFG committed, but he's given the chance from the international community that can be very successful.
Well, Mr. Abdurrahman, let me just get a quick thought out then. The US doesn't seem very keen to commit itself wholeheartedly to Somalia. I know it doesn't want the insurgency, of course, to succeed, but it doesn't seem to be that supportive or supportive of the government as you might expect. Is that because of past bad experience in Somalia?
That could be the reason, but let's also explain the United States government has recently produced a new policy. That policy is not based on the facts of the ground. The so-called dual track policy that came has a positive side and negative side. The positive side is it provides humanitarian assistance and developmental assistance to the peaceful regions of Somalia. But it has the negative side outweighs the positive. What I mean by that, it encourages it undermines and weakens the TFG. It also creates clan-based mini-states in which it encourages warlordism. It also encourages those governments not to be so-called states, not to be loyal to the TFG, because the policy itself says that the policy encourages and provides assistance to the smaller states, even if they are not loyal to the TFG. So the policy is actually a mistake, and we encourage the United States government to reconsider that policy and provide assistance to the peaceful regions as well as to the TFG.
I'll get onto the political landscape in just a few moments, but Professor Samatar, if I could get to you an email we had from a viewer in Kenya. Abdikadir wrote in saying, the only viable solutions for Somalia would be to place a sanction on countries aiding the insurgency and to deploy UN peacekeepers. How do you regard that idea?
Oh, which country, first of all, are aiding the insurgency? Eritrea? Well, Eritrea is in very bad shape itself, doesn't have much of anything to make a difference in Somalia. To my knowledge, there are no other countries that are encouraging the insurgency. And if I may say this, definition of madness or insanity is alleged to be doing the same thing every day over and over again, expecting a different result. The world has come to the rescue of Somalia no fewer than 17 times, beginning with Operation Restore Hope in 1992, and ending in former President Abdullahi Yusuf's election as president in Mbagati, Kenya. No result. Why? In my view, you cannot force a central government on a people who neither understand nor want a central government. And Somalis, in my view, so far, by their actions, are not too keen about the central government.
Okay, I'll get Mr. Abdurrahman's view on that, and also an email to you, sir. This came in from Italy, from Wayeso, who wrote in saying, it is difficult for peacekeeping forces like the UN to help Somalia because of the difficulty in distinguishing the civilians from the insurgents. As long as the transitional government in Somalia remains under Western influence, the conflict will worsen over time.
That is a good point of view that I actually would agree. Because the transitional government, one of the failures of the transitional government is that it failed to produce a Somali national army. There were the 2 years, and the army has not been integrated together. As a matter of fact, those who were trained overseas are now abandoning because of lack of salaries. So the conclusion, what Somali needs in the long term is we need to build a strong Somali force that can replace AMISOM force. In the long term, AMISOM force will not be a solution. Right now, they may be needed, and quite often because of the events that's been happening in the south. But in the long term, we need Somali army that are loyal to Somali people, that are commanded by Somalis, who can take over and replace the AMISOM forces.
Now you say in time, and Professor Samatar, I want to get back to something you said earlier. You said that if all Western and sort of all forces, all foreign forces I should say, withdraw from Somalia, that the Al-Shabaab would take over, but they wouldn't be able to govern because of their, as you put it, barbaric view on Islam and their barbaric way of ruling. The only issue is that in the meantime, until the people are able to rise up against that kind of rule, it's potentially very disastrous, dangerous and lethal for the people of Somalia to have that kind of rule.
I don't, in my view, no more disastrous than what is already happening with the central, with the TFG in power and with African Union troops there. Still, people are getting killed massively. There is this huge refugee population outside of the city of Mogadishu, enormous suffering. So the Somalis are suffering anyway in that part of the country. And to my mind, if we let the Al-Shabaab see power brings responsibility, if they take power and they will oppress people by imposing this barbaric view of Islam, then the people will rise against them.
Okay, I'm going to get back to that. Stay with me. So we're going to take a short break here. When we return, what is the impact of the stalled vote on the new Prime Minister, and what could this Somali American nominee bring to the table? We'll be right back. Welcome back. As Somalis continue to flee fighting between rebels and government forces, a political rift is widening as the president's nominee for prime minister awaits confirmation from a reluctant parliament. Somali American Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed has been met with both praise as a fresh start and cynicism as simply a Western puppet. We're discussing Somali's struggle for stability with Professor Syed Samatar, who teaches history at Rutgers University, and Abdul Qadir Abdurrahman, who's Communications Director of Somali Cause. And Mr. Abdurrahman, if I can get you with an email that came from Mo Hassan, and it touches on what the professor and I were discussing a moment ago. The viewer wrote in, Mo Hassan wrote in saying, why has the UN not stepped in to regulate African Union troops from shelling neighborhoods in Mogadishu? Since AU forces arrived in the capital, thousands of innocent people have lost their lives. And I wonder, when you look at what the professor said about the situation for people, assuming everyone leaves, the foreign forces leave, what's your answer to that?
Well, I share the professor's point of view, where he condemns the attacks that are happening, especially the shelling, indiscriminate shelling from the AMISOM forces. And we think, and we have issued press releases condemning that, and that need to be eliminated as much as possible. And I think that's a good point of view. But what I really want to disagree with the professor is that Somalis cannot govern themselves. I mean, if we govern Somaliland and Puntland, we can surely come up a Somali state, Somali central government. And I think that process takes some time. There has been a lot of transitional governments that were in place that failed, but I think this one has a chance, and the mandate ends next year. But then we need to move from transitional period into a permanent government through elections.
Isn't the professor's point valid, though, that having a decentralized system works better for Somalia, which is essentially tribal, it has its feudal elements, that recognizing the diversity of the Somali regions actually and devolving power from the center, not centralizing it, is actually probably more successful in the long run?
If Somalis themselves, as right now the country is built, people live in regions, and every region there's a specific group that are dominant. But what we are missing, those existed. I mean, right now the Somalia are governed by either warlords or by regions with the administrations. But what we are missing is a central government. What we need is federal government, because that federal government or central government will bring Somalis together. And that's what we need to discuss and dialogue among ourselves. But we should not say that Somalis cannot govern themselves. and therefore they should not be eliminated. Even those who are fighting against the government need to be brought in and included in the reconciliation and discussion and the dialogue.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Let's get Sarhia on the line from DC. Sarhia, what would you like to ask?
I would like to ask that we have been war and civil war for the last 20 years. I was 8 years old when the civil war began, and me and my family are still separated because of that. And I'm sure there's a lot of families that are in the same category as I am. And there's a transitional government, and all of these people that are living in my country, they're not. It's not getting better.
Okay. Well, Sarhia, let me put it in these terms. We're obviously looking for leadership in Somalia. And Professor Samatar, if I could put you the question that, or the comments that Sarhia has made, but also a viewer email that came in from Pakistan, from Abdurazak Essa, who wrote in saying, Somalia's elite lack the political will and commitment to solve the country's conflicts, as seen in the recent resignation of the Somali Prime Minister after a political feud with the president. Now, how do you regard this idea that the Somali elite can't rule, and how do you view the nomination of Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed as the next Prime Minister?
Well, the Somali elite, after all, is from Somalia. My view is that we have a difficult collective personality. That's kind of a dangerous position to take, I suppose. Now, Abdul Qadir's point is well taken. Ultimately, you are going to need a centralized government. But what I'm proposing in this forthcoming book is the creation of a commission of both elders and intellectuals to represent the 4 zones in which the country has broken into, to take care of those things that are necessary for a central government, like passport office, telecommunications, general security. So I'm proposing that we create a very light, limited federal structure led by these commissioners under the tutelage of the UN, and that the 4 zones into which the country has already broken up into should be allowed to look after their affairs. If I may say this, the tragedy of Mogadishu is that the institution of elders, because Mogadishu and surrounding regions, as you may remember, southern Somalia was ruled by Italy, and therefore a significant degree of modernization and development has taken place, which resulted, in my view, in the destruction of the institution of elders by which Somalis have always functioned. Okay. The reason Puntland and Somaliland are stable is that the institution of elders is very much intact.
Okay. Professor, I want to put that to Mr. Abdurrahman here and ask how you regard the new presidential Prime Minister nominee, Mr. Mohammed, especially considering he comes from the south and there seems to be a domination of southern politicians in Mogadishu right now.
The Prime Minister, first of all, he is from the diaspora, he's Somali American, and we believe that he should be given the chance to do what he has to do as the Prime Minister. And I think that the Prime Minister, if given a chance, may be able to be a change from what we had before. But he came through the Formula 4.5, which is a formula that is in the current transitional charter, what we hope will be replaced by the new constitution. And I think even though he is from the south, but he came through the formula of 4.5.
Okay. Interesting what the professor was saying, though, that he feels that the success, where there has been success in Somalia and Somaliland, for example, is where there has been an erosion of the elders, and you know, it seems to contradict the idea of a centralized government.
Right, but we need the power of the elders in order to support and integrate themselves to bring peace and stability in southern Somalia, and as they've done it in the north and the. But what the point I want to correct with the professor is that the insurgents are not composed, who are causing problems in the south, are not only composed southerners. For example, if you look at the Shabab, the two top leadership come from Somaliland. Number 3 person comes from Puntland. Number 4 comes from Mogadishu. So even the insurgents who are causing havoc and destruction in the south are also comprised of all regions of Somalia. So the issue is not south versus north. The issue is more into how can we bring Somalis together, how can we bring peace and tranquility in Somalia through dialogue and discussion.
Right. Professor, I have just 1 minute left. If I could ask for your view on the new Prime Minister candidate, Mr. Mohammed, and the fact that the President has nominated him might actually end some of the traditional clashes between the office of President and Prime Minister. What's your view? Just a quick thought, please, sir.
My response to the so-called new Prime Minister is same old, same old, same old, tweedledee and tweedledum. At this point, as we speak, the President of the Parliament, Sheikh Hassan, Sharif Hassan, and the President of the country are in a serious deadlock, and they can't move. There is no initiative. There is no movement. I do support the idea of giving Sheikh Sharif, Sheikh Ahmed a chance, but it doesn't work.
All right. Well, I want to, of course, say there's so many more questions we haven't had a chance to get into, but thank you, Professor, and thank you, Mr. Abdurrahman, for joining us here with this debate.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being with us too. Now, remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming topics, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, cultures of corruption. We'll tell you which countries rank at the top of the list for the world's most corrupt nations and what's being done to hold dishonest parties accountable. Be sure to tune in for that from me and the team. We'll see you next time.